Well, hello there, Kyle Nenner here from the Indy Star, and just wanted to give a few more thoughts on the Center Grove Carmel rejoining the MIC news that came out on Thursday. Had I guess a day to kind of digest it, or really even more knowing this was coming here this week. But I just wanted to touch on a few more things. I know I have written a couple things already and posted a video, but this format kind of gives you a little bit of a chance to say a little bit more. Um, I think the kind of where I come out on it is I think after 3.5 years of Center Grove and Carmel being out of the MIC, that this is sort of what we've learned in that time is that high school sports was better when those two were in the MIC, and I think on both sides of that. And I know there was some really hard feelings at the time when they were voted out of the conference, which came right before the HEC had voted on either allowing them or not. They ended up not voting them, both those schools, into the HCC. And I know there was reasons for that, some of which were, just hard feelings of wanting to get out of the MIC, a conference they'd been part of since 1996. And part of it was, I think, things that were kind of blown out of proportion that weren't actually attributed to anybody. The culturally aligned comment that was in the letter from the superintendents, that basically informed Carmel and Center Grove that they were out. That was never really, it wasn't. It was kind of unfounded as to where that even came from. That didn't come directly from a Carmel or Center Grove person. It was from a message board post or a Facebook post about someone talking about why they were leaving, and it was they used that as part of the reason as to why they were kicking him out, which I thought in the moment seemed unfair because that was never applied to anybody within the two schools. But no use going back on that. That's been 4 years ago. There were definitely some hard feelings that at the time. I think probably still that some exist to a certain extent. But in the time that has passed, I think as the HCC has gotten stronger and bigger, those schools are suburban schools that have continued to grow and become more successful in a lot of sports, including football, where you had two HCC teams playing in the state finals in 6A last year, which we've never seen before in 6A. It's been all MIC teams or former MIC teams in the case of Carmel and Center Grove, and now going to be in the conference again. So it's been all MIC teams to win 6A since that class started in 2013, and now that glass ceiling has been broken through as well. So I think and I did notice in the release yesterday that the MIC put out, they did note that, hey, we've still won 8 state championships in the time of without Carmel and Center Grove. That's kind of to show, hey, we're still doing fine, without you. But and it's true, they have done well in a lot of sports, even without those two schools. But at any rate, with only 6 schools, I think even having 6 instead of 8 sort of diminishes your conference a little bit. So to get those 2 schools back, the 2 that were with you to begin with, I think is only going to help. The arrangement since 2021 for Carmel and Center Grove just hasn't been great. It's been hard to schedule, especially with football. Center Grove playing a lot of out-of-state teams in 2023, I guess it was. They started the year with 5 out-of-state teams, and that's fine to play. I think a couple every year, even just one, or maybe one every year is probably good, but maybe not. Certainly 5. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Your fans don't know who those teams are. Those are out-of-state teams that have no connection to Central Indiana or even Indiana at all. So, there's no familiarity with those teams. So really nothing to get excited about. Even good teams. I mean, you just don't. There's no frame of reference for those teams necessarily. So maybe playing one of them a year, and especially if it's like Louisville Trinity or Cincinnati St. X or Moeller, those teams, I think at least you have some sort of frame of reference of how good they are in football for sure, and definitely in other sports as well. But playing some random teams that you have no connection to doesn't excite you, and if you're having to go out of state a lot, it costs a lot more. Travel expenses, staying in hotels, all those sorts of things that you have to deal with. But and then it kind of filtered down. And I did talk to Bill Long from Center Grove about this, the superintendent. It kind of filtered down even to like the middle school scheduling. And I know their middle school teams have had to go to, he mentioned Fort Wayne and Tecumseh, this year. So the whole framework of your scheduling kind of gets off when you're having to travel around and try to fill your schedules with just all independent scheduling. Basically, you don't have the framework of a conference to go by. And you're missing out. Talking to Jim Inskeep from Carmel, the AD there. You're kind of missing out on all conference teams. Your kids are missing out on academic all conference, leadership programs within conferences that do those sorts of things together. So there's just a lot of things that kind of go by the wayside when you're not in a conference. And there are certainly being in a conference is not as big a deal like it would be in college, where your TV contracts are tied together, and there's such a money component in college sports, college athletics that go with being in a conference. That doesn't really apply here, but I do think there's a lot of strength in the being together again. And I really like the idea of the MIC and the HCC kind of going against each other in some way. I don't know if there's some sort of, doesn't even have to be a true collaboration or a tie necessarily or something formal like that. But what about playing? I had the idea of actually kind of stole this from somebody else who I know, but kind of the idea of you leave that first week open to play 1-versus-1 of the HCC and Carmel every year in football, or having a basketball event where you play a 1 or 2 day event where you go HCC versus MIC, kind of like the ACC Big Ten used to be. And I know a lot of those teams play each other anyway, so maybe there's a way to combine it, play it somewhere like the fairgrounds or Southport or something. Maybe Southport not, because they wouldn't be a part of either of those conferences, but you could do that somewhere, I would think. So anyway, with both being 8 teams, I think, and both being the biggest schools in Central Indiana, it seems like there's a way for them to maybe compete and have some competitions against each other. That would be kind of fun that way. But most of all, I just think it's best for Carmel, Center Grove. I think we've seen the last 3.5 years that there's just a lot of things that can be better if you're together. And I think the MIC, obviously they feel that way too, or they wouldn't have allowed Carmel and Center Grove back in. I know people have asked, like, well, how did this come about? And there had been talk throughout, these last few months about this happening. I think some of the hard feelings have subsided, and that's kind of what I was worried about was would the egos and hard feelings kind of keep this from happening eventually. And that I'm glad it hasn't, because I think those those things are just things that can be overcome, certainly. So, and being an 8-team conference, I think, is ideal. Going to 10 teams like in the HCC's case, it doesn't really make sense, especially when you're adding when you already have 8 real competitive teams. When that happened 4 years ago, it's kind of like, well, what does the HCC really gain? Even as competitive and good as those 2 schools are, it just adds, it's kind of 10's a high number, and it locks you into a full schedule in football unless you're playing divisions or something. So it makes it even harder for like track meets and things like that to have 10. So I think 8's the perfect number. And I think 6 was, too few, and you kind of lose, like I said, some power that way. There's a lot of schedules that are going to have to be redone in the next few months, but I think that's all part of, things that can be figured out relatively easily. So at the end of the day, this will start in 2026, 27. So next school year, this all becomes, in place. I mean, it's official already, but it goes into action in 2026, 27, and you regain some, some of these rivalries haven't really gone away anyway. Some schools have continued to play Center Grove and Carmel, and some haven't, and those will come back on the schedule starting next year. And I know I think it's worth pointing out too, that not everybody's on board with this as far as some of the sports that, Carmel and Center Grove thrive in are more of the, the kind of the sports that the HCC is better at than maybe the MIC currently. So, some of the coaches in those sports may not be fully in support of this, but I think I think there's a way to keep playing those games and implementing the mixed schedule into it to where it's not going to change that much. And it also gives you, like for track and field, for example, in the MIC, you have the MIC meet, that Center Grove and Carmel get to be a part of again. And I know that's obviously one of the best. I can't imagine there's a better, track meet, and, unless you're talking about the state meet or the sectional or whatever. So that's a really high level meet that I think they will be, they will benefit from competing in again. So I think that's a good thing as well. And, I know there's a lot of, there are going to be more changes. I think that not in this conference necessarily, but more conference changes and probably things we don't even know about, years down the line based on geography, based on how schools grow. Growth is a big part of all this. The schools that grow are going to, benefit and become more competitive, and maybe they grow their way out of a conference, or you grow your way into another one, and those are just kind of the natural progression of why conferences change, and why some schools get in some and are getting out of others, like Greenwood getting out of the mid-state, and things like that. So we're going to see. I don't think it's completely over. It never really is over, but we have seen a lot of changes in the last several years. I think this is the big domino to fall, though, and I don't see this. I think these schools will probably be locked in for a while anyway, into these conferences. So, but yeah, you never say never, but at least we kind of have these big conferences seem a little bit settled. The Conference Indiana situation is one that will have to be worked out eventually with that conference kind of coming apart. And we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, I think it's a good thing. And when I look at it, I think, I know it's not perfect, and I wrote that. I don't think it's a perfect, nothing's perfect, but, but again, I think it's better than the alternative, which is where we were the last almost 4 years now. So it seemed like everything was a little bit diminished, and I think it can be better, and I think it will be better. You get the Copper Kettle game that was coming back next year anyway, between Carmel and Center Grove. And I didn't even mention those schools hadn't been playing each other these last 3 years for different reasons. So that rivalry will be coming back, which is great. I had a lot of Carmel, had some Carmel former players asking, like, why are we not playing them any? That was a game we always look forward to, and I know both sides did. So that game's great. Covered a lot of those over the years, and I think is needed back on the schedule, and it will be coming back next year, regardless of the conference thing. It was coming back. So, but anyway, that's, I think, going to be good for high school sports. Also, just wanted you will have our, if you're watching this before Friday night, have our live show tonight. But wanted to touch just a little bit on briefly the Friday night football game. Indiana State plays Indiana, and I just put out a tweet last night. I wasn't even thinking too much about it. Just had thought about it briefly and put it out there, and got a lot of feedback. And I just said, I know we're long past the point of going back, but still dislike Indiana State playing high school football on Friday night. I got a lot of responses, mostly people who agree, some who don't, and like, why do you care what, you're a hater. I don't know. This is, it's, or I'm crying or whatever, but I don't know. I mean, it's all TV. I mean, I'm not blaming Indiana. If people think I'm blaming the schools, which I think some people just don't know how it works. I mean, the TVs have these windows of games, and they pick the dates and the times where the teams play. So all this is run by television networks. It's not IU saying, yeah, we want to play on Friday night when the high school teams are playing. Or someone else asked too, like, why do you care that high schools play on Friday? Well, exactly. That's the whole point. So it's not the biggest deal ever. We've long past got the point, past the point of getting those Friday nights back, and colleges not playing on Friday nights. That those days are long over with. But I still, I can still not like it. I've been going to high school football games for the better part of my life. And Friday nights have always been about the high schools, and I hate that that's taken away by basically just TV people wanting to take those times and dates up, and they just decide everything. So it's the almighty dollar. I get it, and we're not going back. I'm not saying it's going to, but you can still not like it and still talk about it. And I'm not blaming IU or Indiana State whatsoever. I'm sure they would rather, and Tom Allen had talked many times before about this is dumb that we're playing on Friday nights. So I don't think it's IU people in favor of this by any means. But yeah, so, I'm not again, I'm from the standpoint of, the high school, they're not going to change their games off Friday night because that's their chance. Friday night games compared to Saturdays, night and day difference. You're making your money on Friday nights. You're in school, people are excited doing pep rallies, people go to the games. That's sort of the nature of high schools. You move the games to Saturday, people are out of school, it's out of sight, out of mind, and you don't get nearly as many people to a Saturday high school game as you would on Friday. So that's kind of where I was coming from on that. And the thing about this too, none of the high school players who would visit IU on, say Indiana State, Indiana played noon on Saturday, you'd have a bunch of high school recruits able to go to the game. Well, none of them go now because your game is on Friday and they're playing. So there'll be no high school recruits at the game unless they're coming from out of state and they play on a different night or whatever. So all of the high school games are tonight, are Friday night. So, again, not the end of the world. Those players can go a different week or they have gone already, but it's just, you only get 6, 7 Saturdays home games. So you're missing out on some visit opportunities as well. So again, not the end of the world. I just thought it was kind of worth pointing out where I was coming from on that, that tweet. I didn't think it was very controversial, but like I said, there's a lot of people who did agree, and then some who maybe missed the point or whatever, or said, what do you care, stuff like that. But so yeah, but I don't know. Some people I think miss the point maybe on purpose, it's just to argue, or maybe some really don't understand how it works. But anyway, enjoy Friday Night Football. We'll have plenty more coming at indystar.com, and we'll be here talking tonight as well with some guests about the Friday night Week 4 high school football games.